since we have three elements in our data array here, this is kind of like three different variables but stored in one variable. Yeah, so let's say we want to visualize this data. We could do this in a number of ways. We could display a circle for each datum. We could we could do it in a vast variety of ways. But in this case, let's say we wanted to make a simple bar chart. So each data point here would be represented by a bar. Let's begin by creating the bars variable, and we start out from the canvas variable, which is defined here. Now this is where some strange things begin to happen, and this will be very confusing to you. I think most people are utterly confused by this. There are several steps here which may seem kind of weird in the beginning, but after a while you'll get the hang of it. Let me try to explain the best I can, and then you can just like sit in your favorite chair and just contemplate about this. The first step is to select all. This is a new method we use. Select all is similar to the select method which we looked at previous, but it selects all elements that we specify in here between the brackets and the quotes. So since we want to create bars are basically rectangles, right? So we're selecting all rectangles. But this is weird, right? Because we don't have any actual rectangles on our page. So what this method does in this context is returning an empty array or an empty selection. But it's still useful because we can use that empty selection to bind. We can connect it to our data, and that is done using the data method. And within brackets we specify where our data is coming from. And in this case we have a variable set up here containing our data, so we just specify that our data comes from the data array variable. So far we've bound our data to an empty selection. The next step is the enter method. This method returns placeholders for each data element for which there are no corresponding elements, DOM elements on the page. So yeah, that's weird, but let's say we actually had two rectangles already on the page. Then this data method here would bind them to, we're selecting all the rectangles. So let's say there are two rectangles, and the data method binds our data right here to those rectangles. But the enter method contains placeholders for each data point or each data element for which there are no corresponding DOM elements, and that is rectangles, on our page. But since in this case we don't have any rectangles at all, our enter method contains placeholders for each and every data element. So we're returned with 3 placeholders for each of these values right here. So that's confusing, I know, but let's continue anyways. So now that we have our enter selection, this returns a new selection that we can do stuff with. So we have a selection containing 3 placeholders. Now for each, I'm just going to indent this. This is how I like to do it. For each of these placeholders, we'll append a rectangle. right? Because we want to append a rectangle for each data element, or a bar for each data element. Okay, so append rectangle, and we want to give it some attributes. So let's begin by specifying the width, and previously we just hard-coded this, and we just typed out a value like this. But in this case, we want the width, since the width will be the value, the property that displays the data that we have. We want the width to be a function of the data. So instead of just typing out a value right here, like this, any value, we'll use a function. And if you have no idea what a function means, I'm sorry, but I don't think I have time to explain in detail what it means right now. You can Google it, how functions work in JavaScript. But essentially, it takes an input, does something to it, and returns a value of some sort. So let's return when we have this data, we can give the function an argument, d, whatever. You can call this whatever you like, but the standard is d. So d stands for each data element that we have in our placeholder selection, our enter selection. So we can return d simply here. So we'll return for each data element that is within our enter selection, the width of our rectangle here that we append will be a function of the data. So the first bar will be 20 pixels wide, the second one 40 pixels wide, and the third one 50 pixels wide. And this is similar to a loop, if you've dealt with loops before. It goes through all the data elements, and for each data element it returns the value of that data and assigns the width of the rectangle corresponding to that data. So let's also give it a height. Let's say each we can just say that each rectangle will have a height of 50 pixels. And let's take a look at how this looks. So we head over to our browser and hit refresh. We just get this blob, and that is because we need to separate, since SVG starts drawing from the top left. Each rectangle is placed in the same place, so the biggest rectangle covers the rest of them. So we need to give them additional properties. Let's give them the y property, which is the vertical coordinate. Let that be a function of the index, and this is another thing you just have to get used to. Since we have this placeholder selection, the functions, the first argument contains the data 20, 40, 50. The second one contains the number, the index of each data. So this is the first one, the second one, and the third one. So let's since I stands for index, we can return I times let's say 100, and let's save this and refresh, and we see that the distance between each rectangle, the vertical distance, is 100 pixels. Well, you don't see that, but it is. So this is 50 pixels tall, since that's what we specified here in the height. And since the distance is 100 pixels, there's a 50 pixel gap between each rectangle. But it doesn't look very good, right? They're really tiny, and you can hardly see the difference between them. So let's here in the width property, we can return d times, let's say, 10. So it will return this value here for each data element times 10. So 20 will be 200, and so on. Let's save. Oh no, save and refresh, and we get we're getting somewhere. This is, yeah, it's a very basic, ugly looking bar chart, but at least we have a bar chart, and the bar chart is powered by our data element here. But so yeah, in the future this data variable will be replaced by a larger data set, probably in an external file somewhere. Yeah, that's an introduction to displaying data using D3, and I know it's very complicated, but yeah, it just takes a lot of practice and thinking. So yeah, I'll see you in the next video.